Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm delighted to be talking on this episode with Paul Pope, comics creator, author, artist, and currently sort of suspended in gravity, I think. Your image is on the side, and mine is
Oh, wait,
vertical,
I'm on. Oh, wait a second. I was trying to. Okay, wait.
but
No,
I
I
love it
guess I'm not
though.
good.
I love it.
Yeah, I
I
guess
was just going
I'm
to
not
go
gonna.
with it.
I guess I'm not able to go landscape as well. But there we are. How's the sound quality on these headphones? They're brand new. Like good.
It's great. Sounds great. And
Okay,
I thought
good.
you were making a comment on top of the shirt you're wearing, Stay Surreal, by
Oh, so
being on the
oh
side.
yeah,
I thought you were
yeah,
doing a little Salvador Dali, maybe MC Escher commentary
yeah.
there with the video, which could be
I should
fun.
have. Yeah, I should have gone with that. But yeah, I don't know. I really never did. I guess nobody really did Zoom calls that much before COVID. So I don't do them that often. I do when I work in film more than anything really. But it's still kind of new to me. So
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. We got immersed in Zoom for a while there, and it seems to be a nice go-to for connecting this way, but
yeah,
not the dominant discourse, certainly.
yeah,
So I appreciate you jumping in and talking with me. And I always like to ask about sort of comics origins. I think my official question for you that was on the list, and by the way, we could go anywhere from the
sure.
official list that you'd like. It's not
Mhm.
really official at all. Something along the lines of, what do comics allow you to do as a storyteller?
I think it's a really great medium. It's very versatile. Uh, you can work alone. You can work in collaboration if you want. Really, the limitation is your imagination. And then from there, like there's the skill set you bring and your intention with the art form or the storytelling form, however you want to look at it. And when I got into comics, I was coming out of like a gradual morphing of my studio arts, art history background. I went to Ohio State, transferred through SUNY. I had good grades in school, so I got a scholarship to study painting and art history in London,
Nice,
England.
nice.
So I lived there for a while. And yeah, I'm really glad I had that background before I got into comics professionally because I came with a lot of like Western and Eastern art historical uh, understanding about like picture making and how the eye flows and composition and all the color theory and all this stuff. And having worked in film, it's just very different because you can work alone.
Mhm,
Whereas
mhm.
when you work in film or TV, it's lots of people and there's a chain of command and there's all kinds of things. And so I've really I'm glad I got very interested in comics at a young age because now I've been doing it for 30 years almost.
Mhm.
And I've got ongoing projects. I have a number of books in print and I just love it. I mean I do branch out. I also work in film and TV as we said, and I do screen printing. I work in fashion. I work with record labels designing album art, tour posters for bands and stuff. So just whatever is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I love that range. Love the range of what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also like having come from, like I studied pop artists a lot when I was in school, and it was just very interesting to me how, like, just take an obvious example, like Andy Warhol, like, you could be a legitimate draftsman and then work in commercial art and then also work in events and then, do all sorts of like collaborations with bands or fashion labels or make film, and I always thought that was a really appealing thing because, when I broke into comics in the early 90s, I felt like, I mean, this is all before the internet and everything. You were probably reading comics back then. It felt like the
Mhm,
division
mhm,
was you either had to choose to go mainstream, which means you draw for Marvel or DC,
mhm,
or you work for Hanna-Barbera. If you work for Hanna-Barbera doing animation, you're not even in comics. Or
mhm.
you can be an indie guy underground, and then you're going to get a book contract with Fantagraphics, or you're going to work with Last Gasp to do underground comics and sell through head shops. And I always felt like that was too segmented for my vision of what you could do creatively with the medium. So I've always tried to find a way to like break through like the barriers that I sort of saw between like indie and mainstream and that kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm. That leads into a question that I was going to ask, which is, you have these worlds that are independently created. They're part of your vision, part of your unique creation, like Battling Boy, like Heavy Liquid, like THB and 100% and those. But you also have Batman Year 100 and
Hmm.
work on the Batman Chronicles and other pieces like that. So
Hmm.
what's it like to kind of toggle back and forth, or is it a back and forth for you?
It's I don't know if it's a back and forth so much as like, when you work on commercial projects, like if I work with Criterion or Sony Records, or I do projects with Paramount Pictures or Netflix or something, you always try to get a sense of what the client wants, what the client needs,
Hmm.
and then make sure there's an understanding. Like, this is my drawing style. It's not going to look like Norman Rockwell. It's going to or Dr. Seuss. It's going to look like this. And then really try to listen to what they want, and then try to just deliver excellence, like above and beyond what they're expecting. In the case of Batman, I mean, I love the character. He's iconic, and I thought I had a good idea for a graphic novel, which isn't easy for a character as big and ubiquitous as Batman, because where can you possibly take this character after the zillion movies and cartoons and comic books and stuff?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then I just tried to make sure that the project had the integrity of the character and what the company wanted. And then with something like Battling Boy, it's more personal. Obviously, it's a book for young adults. It's fantasy, science fiction. And in that case, there's more freedom because I'm creating the story from scratch. I mean,
Hmm.
there's obviously references to like mythology and Silver Age comics and French comics and things. But again, I tried to make sure that the project fit within the parameters of what the publisher can do, and then just try to deliver the most excellent project I can.
I think it was.
Within that.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think Battling Boy was the first book of yours that I encountered,
Oh,
actually.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I got to be
That
fully
book did.
immersed.
Oh, great. Yeah. That book did really well. I've been saying this for a long time about the second book. I'm um, just working hard to wrap the second book. Hopefully by the end of this year. It's 2023, just in case this is archived. And
Mhm, mhm,
we already have a publication scheduled for it, which I'll let the publisher for a second announce when they're ready. But it's an ongoing process, and I've also been working on film adaptation of Battling Boy now at two different studios, and it takes me out of comics, and
mhm.
that I work on different projects, and so it's just, I mean, I had no idea it would take 10 years to finish this thing, but when it's done, I have a 500-page graphic novel, so it's going to be a phone book
Mhm,
by
mhm.
the
That's
end of it.
considerable.
And it's a statement, and like when I was working in Japan in the 90s, and until I actually went over to Tokyo and I was working over there with my editors, and I didn't really grasp fully that a lot of manga, the popular manga we know of, even things like Akira or Astro Boy, they're made by a studio,
Mhm,
and an apprenticeship, and so it's more similar to a film studio in that sense, where you have multiple people working on projects on the same project. So it's not, as opposed to like in my case, I'm one guy. I write and draw. I edit my own stuff.
mhm.
Sometimes color my own stuff, but that it's a whole other thing. So that I prefer to work with some of the, I work with some of the best colorists in the business, and it just takes a lot longer to when you're doing it all yourself.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's not easy to make a 500-page graphic novel. It's easy to do it badly. It's just not easy to do it well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why the monthlies are sort of almost in this supply chain where you have
Hmm.
like there's one person that pencils, one person that inks, one person that colors, one person that letters, one
Yep.
person that edits, and then it comes
Yeah.
together in 20 some days, hopefully. And it doesn't
Yeah.
always come together.
It's true. And I mean, I'm in sort of a unusual position because since I started working on Battling Boy, I've sort of become more of a novelist or graphic novelist where I'm delivering a book. And
Hmm.
I'm not doing, I mean, I've done monthlies before, bi-monthlies before, like, my earlier projects, whether it's Heavy Liquid, Batman, even THB was on a fairly consistent schedule. It's just much more of a grind,
Hmm.
but I mean, when you're in your 20s and you're not married and you have low overhead, it's a lot easier to do that. I mean, lately I've been working 10-hour days again, which feels great. It feels very natural. I don't mind not going out, and it's just there's more distractions. If people are, constantly expect you to be available by text or by social
Hmm.
media and stuff. And then when you have multiple projects, that means you have multiple creative teams, multiple editors, multiple invoicing, that stuff. So it's a lot easier to get distracted in today's world than it used to be, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of screens and
Yeah.
streaming things and all of those pieces.
Yeah. It's funny too, because I have a really large uh, library of books. I would estimate probably in the tens of thousands. I don't know for sure. I've got one, two. I've got besides my studio here in New York, which is just basically full of books.
Mm-hmm.
I have two storage spaces with books, and I had those all basically for research and reference before we had Google image search and things like that. Because if I remember one time I worked on a project for Swamp Thing. There was an encyclopedia that Vertigo published, and they called me to draw a Daphne plant. And I didn't even know what a Daphne plant was, but it's freelance. I needed the money. So I'm like, yeah, I can draw that, no problem. What did I do? I had to get up and go down to Barnes and Noble and buy an encyclopedia of plants. So I have an encyclopedia of plants just because I needed a picture of a Daphne plant. It's just how we had to do it back then.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. No Googling and saying, what is this? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What is this? A reverse image search, which is a really fun one, right? You can find some of the most obscure things that way. But
True.
yeah. So I mean, it's funny with I have to actually make a point to look at my book collection now
Hmm.
because it's so easy to look at, do research online, whether like I'm doing some commissions at the moment. I just finished a Weapon X commission based on Wolverine, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's just like, okay, I need an image of a samurai running in the snow. And there's hundreds and hundreds of them.
Yeah. Yep.
Whereas in the old days you had to like watch some Kurosawa movies and then or imagine it or look at some pictures of the Arctic and piece it together. Like you still do that, but it's a lot easier to get specific reference than it used to be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, it's screens.
Yep. Very true. Very true. As we are connecting across the screen here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned editors and some of the process there, and I was going to mention, I think it was Bob Schreck that said, you're one of the few artists, maybe the only artist, who you kind of look at the page and you can hear music as you're looking at what
Oh
you've done
wow.
on the page. Yeah. Um, so I'm pretty sure that was Bob Schreck that I was talking with. So that leads me to talk about your work with Bob Schreck, as well as the playlist that you have in mind or that you're jamming out to as you're creating.
Yeah. Well, I think I have a pretty diverse, like an eclectic musical taste. Both my parents are musicians, and so I grew up with classical music and jazz and rock and roll, and I play guitar myself. I've recorded before, and a lot of my friends are musicians, so I think a lot about that aspect, and I'm very conscious of like rhythm and pattern, and of course, in our case, we're talking about static images on a page.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so a lot of my favorite artists are abstract expressionists like Robert Motherwell or William de Kooning, these sorts of artists. And so I'm very conscious of the type of mark making I'm doing, which is being utilized specifically to evoke a certain emotion
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
enhance an emotion. So I do think a lot in maybe a music theory sense when it comes to page layouts. Um, but I mean, I think people might be surprised to realize I listen not to a lot of like rock and roll, even though I do listen to that stuff. I like when I'm working, I pretty much listen to like ambient music or classical, sometimes 60s jazz.
Nice.
Anything without lyrics. Like when it comes to like rock music, I might listen like once a day for 2 minutes. I might listen to a track. Like right now, I just finished album art for uh, my good friend Jim Jones. He's from England. He's got a great band called the All Stars, and they have a record coming out in September this year, and it's phenomenal. And I went down to Memphis with him to record at Sun Studio and Memphis Magnetic. It's like real, like, it's not too far from where you live, in fact, like
Hmm.
the energy of like Howlin' Wolf and Elvis and Johnny Cash. And he really, even though the record's kind of like garage rock, so I can tell like, he's got a horn section and like piano player and stand-up bass, and it's just a really good rock record. So because I just did the album art for that, I'm really proud of it. I just really like the album. So like if I'm gonna go out or something, I might put on one of his tracks and like really listen to it. But when I'm working, I'll listen to like anything from, I don't know, Michael Stearns, Brian Eno, um, Chopin, Beethoven. I listen to a lot of like Tibetan gongs
Nice,
and
nice.
just like Russian liturgical music, like just all kinds of stuff to kind of
Yeah.
keep you in that like flow. Because then
Chopin,
once you,
oh,
yeah,
sorry.
no, just once I noticed for myself, because I feel like you have to actively fight against the intrusion of social media and the internet in general
Hmm.
to get into a focused state. It helps to be listening to something that's very modular and continues. So, like we say Chopin, like you might listen to his nocturnes or
Hmm.
some of
Hmm.
his longer compositions. Like I prefer listening to that stuff because it's much more of a focused state of mind.
Yeah, yeah. Chopin is a go-to for me. Tchaikovsky,
Hmm.
absolutely.
I've been into there's an early 20th century French composer named Olivier Messiaen who worked on early electronic music.
Oh, wow.
And I can send you a link to some of his stuff. And I've been getting into that. It's really interesting music, very quiet. There's also a really great Egyptian musician named Amin Ra who plays the theremin, believe it or not.
Mm,
She is in LA now, I believe, but it's just really beautiful, ethereal music.
mm.
And if you like Chopin, you might like this. It has a real kind of a dreamlike quality and very nocturnal sounding, really beautiful.
Love
So that's
it.
the stuff I gravitate to.
Yeah, yeah. So mentioning the Bob Shrek connection, any shout outs to folks, collaborations that have been especially generative,
Sure.
sort of go-to interactions?
I think like I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of great editors in the field. Karen Berger, Shelley Bond. My current editor, Mark Siegel, at First Second's really great. Um, I have some editors in Europe I work with. Yves Schlift is one with Dargo. My other editor at Dargo, recently retired, is Thomas Ragun. They've been great. I'm sure Axel Alonso.
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
Trying to think of a few other people. Um, and Bob and I have a good rapport because we became friends years before I worked with him. I think he was the editor on one of my first graphic novels, The One Trick Ripoff, which was
mhm,
for Dark
mhm,
Horse, and he was also working with Frank Miller at the time. So that was a nice connection because when Frank moved to New York and he was working on uh, his second Dark Knight book, I was working on Batman Year 100, and the three of us would meet up and have lunches sometimes. And we'd look at our art together. And Bob has this great quality that Nick Cave says he seeks in uh, music critics, where they know how to encourage and flatter.
mhm, mhm.
And I've always thought Bob had that really down well because like he'll listen to your ideas, and if he doesn't agree with them or thinks they could be molded a little bit better, he'll just ask the right rhetorical questions to get you to kind of come up with your own conclusion that makes the story better.
Mhm.
And I think he's particularly good at knowing how to push the artist's buttons to make sure that they deliver on time, to stay on schedule. And of course, when DC Comics was still here in New York and not in Burbank, I'm in Manhattan. Whether it's Shelley Bond or Karen or when Bob Schreck was the Batman group editor, it's a lot more warm to go up to the offices once a week, deliver pages,
Mhm.
and look at them together, and they go out for lunch or go out for dinner afterwards. And we did that for years, and it was just a really nice way to do it. And I think it's been a little more self-starting now. I scan my own art here. I don't drop it off production anymore, and I might have a call with my editor on with Mark Siegel on Battling Boy, or if I'm working on something smaller, maybe once a month, twice a month. And so there's even First Second is in Wall Street, which is about 15 minutes from where I live.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm in Manhattan, and there's rarely anybody in the building now. So I'll go
Yeah.
down and meet up with my art director, Kirk Bischoff, who is in the office a few days a week. But that's like one of the only real face-to-face connections I have with editorial and production at the moment. Otherwise, it's all Zoom calls like this or emails.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of a different world that we live in. Staying
Definitely, yeah,
connected. Yeah.
yeah.
When I talked with Bob Schreck, he was talking about that idea of being a fertile ground for creators and creating that space as an editor. And then he was also just talking about the human connections that
Hmm.
were such a part of his work and have been a part of his work.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I went to his wedding reception, and I was the witness at his marriage at the courthouse downtown. And we've traveled. We've been to Europe together. We countless different cities we've been to traveling together, and I've been to his house many times. And it's just like that's like it goes beyond the editor talent relationship. And the
Mhm.
same's true with Mark Siegel. I know I've met his family, and Mark and I have traveled a lot. When Battling Boy One came out, we had an extensive tour. And I'm not sure what we're going to do for PR for book two, but I'm sure we'll do something.
Mhm.
And, I miss Mark. And when he was just in San Diego Comic Con, and I saw on Instagram all the freelance people I know and editorial people I know from First Second. And I'm here in New York. I chose not to go. I don't have anything to promote at the moment. So, it's just like touching base with them and like, oh, next year, let's definitely like have some, FaceTime. Because I think the one thing that, even though cartoonists oftentimes are naturally isolated, like I have a good social life, not a lot of cartoonists in my social life.
Mhm.
It's a good time to sit down with, the people who work in your field, not just people who might know you're an artist or something, or think it's cool you draw comic books. It's like actually people who do it too. And you read their work and you want to talk to them about some, details about how they did what they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Uh, Um, so as far as the work that you do, any particular motifs, any particular vision that you feel like unifies a good bit of what you're sharing?
I like science fiction a lot. I consider myself a science fiction writer, and I'm very interested in carrying on analog traditions. A lot of my art heroes, I think it's pretty well known. Jack Kirby, Mobius, Frank Miller is, he's a good friend of mine too. But I mean, I still admire Frank for everything he's done. He's a very talented artist. He still is.
Hmm.
I've been over to his place not too long ago. He has stacks and stacks of new drawings he's working on. He's writing all the time. It's inspiring. But I work mostly with a brush and archival tools, archival papers. And, a lot of my peers are moving more and more to digital just because it's easier. Maybe it's easier to finish the work. It's more portable.
Hmm. Hmm.
But, because I also sell originals and I do commissions through Felix Liu, my art rep. There's always been an impetus, in my case, to continue the tradition of working on paper. And also, I just like making things. It comes from the studio arts background. I used to stretch canvases, and
Hmm.
when I screen print, I oftentimes work in my own prints, do all the color separations myself. All that, and I worked in a print shop. Uh, that was my job when I was in college, when I was first starting out in comics. So, I got a lot of background in commercial printing, which was interesting to me. So yeah, I mean, it's just something I really like to carry on. But yeah, so then theme wise, I would say science fiction. And also, I like intimate stories. It's one thing I like about manga. Manga has a really good way of internalizing the narrative flow so that
Hmm.
you have a good sense of the character in the story, not just the story. So, like, point A to point B, and, the story ends, the end. You're more like, what does it feel like to be this character? And
Mhm.
so that's one reason when I did Batman Year 100, I really tried to emphasize how difficult a job it is for this guy to put on this illusion that he's this otherworldly, vampiric. That's one reason, with my background in manga, I was interested in taking that notion of like making the subjective experience of the character the center of the story.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
tried to apply that my own way to the experience of being Batman, and like not just like Batman bursts in and hits Clayface, and it's like it's exhausting being a superhero, and you're
Mhm.
hurt a lot, and you need to depend on people to like stitch you up, or build your machines for you and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting take on the character that up to that time I felt like we didn't see a lot. I think the Chris Nolan films tried to get into that a little bit more.
Mhm.
I think,
Mhm.
so I mean, of course, these are all like different, you know, fractal versions of Batman, who's, sort of like an Uber character, as opposed to like there's like one storyline, and everybody
Mhm.
knows Bruce Wayne's parents were killed by Joe Chill or whatever his name was.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's part of his canon. But then you outside of that, you could take the character anywhere.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, I think those are themes, and I've been been working on Battling Boy for almost a decade. I still write things outside of this one primary project I'm working on. So I've got lots of scripts for things that I'm planning on moving into after Battling Boy. But I think after this book, I don't think I'm going to try to tackle another 500-page graphic novel, like no time soon, for sure.
Yeah,
Just
that's quite a journey, I'm
it's
sure.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So, but I think it'll be worth it. I mean, it's really frustrating that I have like well over. I mean, I was actually talking to a friend of mine. I was going through my unpublished work. I probably have about 250 pages of unpublished comics sitting like right. This is my like all my artwork. Well, I better not show it because there's stuff on it you can't see. But well, just here. Let me just turn this over.
Yeah, yeah.
But just a quick little. This is my studio here in Manhattan. So there's
Oh,
part of my
wow.
book collection.
Uh-huh.
So here we have. This is my current work.
Uh-huh.
I have a storage space in Brooklyn that's nothing but my art, my other art. But this is all, work in progress. This second file here is all Battling Boy. So this is all Battling Boy 2, all of this.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just that, no one can see it till the book's finished. And then we put it through production, which will take months. So by the time it's in print, it's gonna be months after I deliver it. So we still have a ways to wait, but we're getting closer. So, that's the good news. But it's the most agonizing thing is every time I do public appearances, there are two questions people ask about Battling Boy. Number one is why is the book so small? And then number two is when is book two coming?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it looks like we have a little more freedom with publication size. So I think when we get back to the publication schedule for, I guess, a relaunch for book one, and then book two, and then eventually an omnibus, we have some options to go larger,
Nice.
which is
Nice.
something that makes me happy, at least, because that's my only complaint is, I mean, the reason First Second publishes the library format is because I think a third of our sales come from school libraries and public libraries.
Ah, that makes sense.
And so those are perennials, and they order books all the time. And there are some schools that have used Battling Boy, I think, for like seventh grade literature class, where the kids can like write essays about mythology. So you
Hmm.
can pick out a book and then use that as a basis for your book report. And so that's really great because like when we toured the book, we went to lots and lots of schools, mostly around North America, up through Canada, all over the states, meeting lots of kids and educators, librarians and stuff. And that's great because it's a completely different world from like what we normally think of, like the Comic-Con circuit and,
Hmm.
indie stores, or like a big chain store like Golden Apple or Midtown Comics here in New York. I mean, these are big client bases for sales.
Hmm.
So if I do a signing at Forbidden Planet or something, it usually gets hundreds of people, which is great. And then the when you do a talk at a library, that's maybe 100 people, maybe dozens of people, depends on the city and the promotion. But that's an entirely different audience of people. One thing that really attracted me to working with First Second, and their parent company's Macmillan, and
Mhm.
they own all sorts of different imprints, whether it's Tor, they have a poetry imprint, they have cookbook imprint. I mean, it's I think one of the top six publishers. The owner, Holtzbrink, is a German company. I mean, they're very dedicated to education and literature.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I thought that was a really good place to take a project like Battling Boy, considering I'm trying to write it for young people. Like the age demographic they kind of targeted was anywhere from like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old up through all ages.
Mhm.
We did
Mhm.
we have noticed like there's some imagery in because Battling Boy is a lot of monsters kidnapping kids. That's kind of the problem in the story. Like with little kids, it's a little too scary, I think. So we have noticed like fifth grade and up is probably the right demographic for Battling Boy. But it's great because you meet an entirely different uh, group of people than you would going to Comic Con or book signings at comic shops. So that's
Mhm.
been pretty neat. It's been very eye opening.
And to get to tap into a younger generation like that and be the potentially the first graphic novel or comics
Oh
form
yeah.
that they've read is that's a big deal.
Oh, there were a lot of kids like that. I remember we've been to some places. I remember one time we went to some small town in up northern Indiana, very small, like farming town.
Mhm.
And I did the presentation for the school, and they were very welcoming, and everyone was really nice. And I had lunch with like the 5 or 6 kids in art school who like had hopes to like maybe somehow get into the arts and become art educators, and the art teacher and the principal. And they told me they're like, you're the first artist that these kids have ever met. They never realized you could make a living as an artist.
Mhm.
And it's like, wow, this is something that I would imagine that they're probably not going to forget anytime soon. And so yeah, there were a lot of little kids who said this is their first graphic novel, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, there's so many creators that come on here that can point back and say, I met this person. I got to go to this person's office, or this person came to my school, and I
Yeah,
suddenly realized, oh, there's a person that does this, and I want to do
right.
that too. So,
Yeah,
that's a huge, huge thing for a kid. So
yeah.
amazing.
I think I did. Yeah, because I started doing comic book shows like before I did Comic Con. A friend of mine convinced me to go to Comic Con 1994. It's pretty early on THB. I had no idea comic book conventions existed. I mean, when I was a kid, you could go to the mall and there'd be like some guy at a flea market with like long boxes of old comic books.
Hmm.
But like to actually go and meet other creators, that was pretty eye opening.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I also have to say, pulling out the drawer with the stacks of pages, best tease ever. I
Oh yeah,
mean,
okay.
even without a tagline, I think pulling it out and saying you can't see this yet. I think
Well,
that
I'll
clip
show
needs
you.
to be like,
Okay, I'm going to give you one little tease here. Then
oh,
I feel
nice, nice,
okay.
thank
I
you.
feel okay showing this. So, the film was at Paramount, and
Hmm.
then it's been at Netflix. I guess the word's getting around that Battling Boy's been at Netflix for animated feature for a while. But working on the film alongside the book, I've done all these what they call key sequence or key frame images, and so I don't mind showing this one. It's I did
Oh,
this to show Battling Boy and all the various monsters.
love it.
So this wouldn't appear in the film, but this is a presentation piece that I did when you're going in to like sell the film. So there's no legal conflict by showing this because I own the art.
Great,
But yeah,
great.
so this is like my other job is working on the film, and so it's just kind of in and out of comics and then in and out of film, and then that kind of thing. I mean, I wouldn't want to move to LA and be more immersed in that world. I like New York for all of the various reasons that are great about New York, even though they're all hassles too. But
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just glad that First Second is here because my art editor Kirk Bischoff and I, we do meet once a month or so. I drop off pages and then we get lunch and we talk about all kinds of things, whether it's his kids or movies or travel or production schedules. The different people that I work with that you just don't get to see them. So I think it's important to do that because
Yeah.
for so long all of us had to stay inside and not see anybody.
True. True. This is true.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe one day you and I will cross paths in person as well. There are a couple
Sure.
of people at Heroes Con that have met me and can attest to
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that I don't live in Zoom. I'm not an avatar or an AI or anything like that. So
I love Heroes is one of my favorite shows. They've always been really great. I've been down there a few times. Shelton Drum is great. He
hmm
used to have an employee who became a good friend of mine, Dustin Harbin, who's since gone on to become, I think, a really great cartoonist in his own right.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, you probably met him, and
I believe
lots
so,
of
yeah.
yeah, he's a really good guy, and that show's nice because it's manageable. That show in Baltimore are two of my favorites,
Yeah.
and I like the cities a lot. The people are great. The big shows can be a little bit chaotic, I think.
hmm hmm
Then you're competing with like media things as well. Like San Diego's. I remember San Diego before it got kind of taken over by Marvel films and Warner Brothers and stuff, and now video games and things. And it's a
hmm
little more unwieldy than it used to be.
Yeah,
But
that's what I've
this
heard.
the small shows are fun. So, but yeah, this year I'm only doing New York Comic Con. That's my one American show, I think. And then saving appearances and PR and stuff for next year, just because, for so long, to make a graphic novel, you have to, work in a cave somewhere. Oftentimes you're,
Especially
you know, yeah, and then,
500 pages.
yeah, and then, sometimes, when the book advance runs out, you have to come up with income elsewhere while you're still finishing the book. So it's a real dedication to, get anything like this done. So,
Mhm, mhm,
I try to stay fast. It's just that there's more distractions now. So like I was saying earlier, like this past couple of months I've been working like 10-hour days almost every day. And
mhm.
it feels great. I go to the gym, I see my girlfriend once or twice a week, and then it's just like, okay, this is how it used to be to like get these things done.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, looking forward to seeing it out in the world, Battling Boy, and you mentioned things to come with THB as well. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, we decided the plan's always been to get Battling Boy out first and then THB. But I think it was Kirk's idea, my art director, Kirk, said, why don't we just start putting both out at the same time? That THB is essentially done.
hmm
So all the art was in Ohio. I'm from a town called Bowling Green, Ohio. I've
hmm
been in New York for 25 years now, but that's where I'm from. And so I have a big storage space there with lots of books and my artwork. And I was, I archived all my stuff. It was all safe. So a couple of months ago, I brought back, it's something like 1,000 pages of THB. And so now it's in production. We're scanning everything so we can figure out how to, the publication size and the formatting and stuff. So I'm sure there'll be some news on that alongside Battling Boy. So I hope, when these announcements start coming out, it's going to be a really nice body of work consistently coming out because it's been a while since
hmm
I've been on the shelves outside of, which I think my last published comics work was with Anthony Bourdain for Hungry Ghosts. I did covers for that book, and he wrote a story for me, so I worked on that. And then I did a book called The Willows for a really good like art book boutique book publisher called Beehive Books,
hmm
and that was an illustrated adaptation of a horror writer I like a lot called Algernon Blackwood.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's a gorgeous book. They make really gorgeous books, and I hope to work with them in the future as well. And they have an ongoing series. The latest one they did was an adaptation of Pinocchio with Mike Mignola, which is really gorgeous.
hmm
And so they're just, so I like to kind of like balance, whether it's mainstream. I guess you'd have to say Anthony Bourdain's mainstream. It's just in a different way because when we do appearances, the people that show up are like chefs and sous chefs and journalists, and they're like food industry people because
Hmm.
that's his audience. So it's it's fun to, and then again with like Algernon Blackwood, that's like the kind of supernatural, phantasmagoric horror literature fans, and working with Beehive, um, that's that's sort of a project because it's an illustrated prose adaptation, beautiful slipcase, hardcover, nice big book, beautiful production values. That's a different audience too, right? So I think it's nice to be able to try to like get into these different overlapping realms where people like sequential art or comics or illustration, and it's nice because it reaches these different quadrants that all sort of overlap with illustration and the art of drawing.
Hmm. Hmm. And you mentioned science fiction in your draw there, and the supernatural, the paranormal, and phantasmagoric is just such a great uh, set of ideas and set of experiences that lives in that genre.
Mhm.
So I always
Yeah,
enjoy that about your work.
yeah. I mean, most of if you look at the large like the Willows, the Algernon Blackwood project is sort of the outlier because I never really did anything with like supernatural suspense type material.
Mhm.
Most of what I've done, I would say, qualifies as science fiction, and the stuff I've been writing since starting Battling Boy has all pretty much been science fiction
Mhm.
based.
Mhm.
So there are projects I want to get into when my schedule clears up next year, hopefully around this time next year, and just they're going to be shorter.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I know people that talk about the 200 to 300 page graphic novel and what a commitment that is. So, again, 500 pages is it's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, I remember when Jeff Smith was doing Bone. He might have mentioned this when he was on with you, like all those years, like because I lived in Columbus, Ohio, while he was making Bone. Then when I moved to New York, he and his wife, Vijaya, were coming to New York a lot. They were considering moving here. So I would show them around and we would go out to dinner and we'd go do things. And like, here's this neighborhood, here's that neighborhood. All the while he was working on Bone on a consistent basis, traveling, touring. Sometimes he was wearing an arm brace because he was having carpal tunnel.
Hmm.
Sometimes he'd get a sty in his eye and he had to wear like a patch over his eye or an abrasion on your cornea from like looking at, like the reflection of your drawing lamp in the wet ink.
Hmm.
Eventually your eye just gets, it's like, I mean, even though this is like low impact work, there's, you still have to have a massage once in a while. And, I've been to a chiropractor before because I mean, it all comes with a bit of even though it's not as dangerous as, some of the, construction labor work,
Hmm.
there's still things you have to be conscious of. And so, because I
Yeah.
mean, in his case, the 1,000 page book like Bone, it's quite an achievement. He doesn't have to do it again. Like now he's done it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is true. And will be forever known as.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a perennial, and I think that's if you're a graphic novelist and you're trying to hit that brass ring. I think that's what you want. You want to make sure that you're working on a project that's good enough that it's going to stay on the shelves.
Hmm.
And we have plenty of examples of those, whether it's Watchmen, Bone, Peanuts. I would say Love and Rockets, one of my favorite series.
Hmm.
You can go down the list, all kinds of stuff. I would say probably Adventure Time hits that now. Like, I mean, there's books that, American Born Chinese, Craig
Hmm.
Thompson stuff. You could go down the list of not even getting into European or manga. So that's always been the intention going into Battling Boys. Like, I want to do one that's going to like last.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And uh, I enjoy it a great deal. Recommend it. You mentioned seventh grade readers, but it has some nice flexibility across age groups, and that's not an easy thing
Oh
to
yeah.
do to create something that's all ages that way.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, that's something C.S. Lewis said. I read an interesting interview. It was he, Kingsley Amis, and Tolkien. I think the essay was called Unreal Estates. You could probably find it online. And they're just talking about their work. Or was it Huxley? No, I think it was Kingsley Amis. But C.S. Lewis made a good point. He said, when you're writing to children, you can't write down to them.
Hmm.
You just have to write directly to them. And he said, because they're going to tell if you're patronizing. And I always thought that was cool. So considering all of us who grew up reading Jack Kirby and this
Mhm.
stuff, or watch Johnny Quest. Like, we remember what it was like to be a kid. So I'm like, you know what? If you stay true to that spirit, you can still put stuff in there that's going to appeal to the older reader who remembers Tex Avery cartoons or knows European comics or whatever it might be. And so eventually, I think we're going to, for a second, we're going to try to do some sort of an annotated guide that, because there's a lot of stuff in Battling Boy. It's all, based on Carl Jung or research of Gilgamesh or,
Mhm.
the Iliad, there's, the Norse mythology, Upanishads from India. There's a lot going into the story that is not evident on the surface, even beyond the comic book stuff. And then that would be nice too, because then the kids that read Battling Boy in school will be able to have that cliff notes to, incorporate comics into their educating curriculum.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and just to give a true to life story, my wife is a teacher. We were doing some book shopping earlier today, and one of the books that she was looking at, actually a set of books, was kind of this, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was kind of an atlas of the Cryptozoic, basically.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've
And
seen these. I've seen these.
yeah, yeah. And she was saying like kids love to read those kind of things. So that would be a perfect companion, uh,
Yeah,
sort of like little segments about different creatures, characters, and where they come from, because it
yeah.
is fascinating.
There's a there's a podcast I listen to called I think it's called Stuff to Blow Your Mind.
Mhm,
If
mhm.
you've heard of this, it's on Apple. It's usually pretty good, but they've been doing something interesting where they'll go into kind of like crypto creatures. They've been doing, I think, Star Wars recently. So they'll look at something like the Tauntaun or the Wampa, and they'll relate it to, or they did one actually on Ben Grimm, the Thing
Uh-huh,
from
uh-huh,
Marvel, and they've been doing like Marvel characters, and then they'll relate that to actual animals that exist and like different traits scientifically that like they with the case of the Thing, they went into something about how like why does Ben Grimm only have three fingers when he's the Thing, but when he's Ben Grimm he has four. And then they were relating that to certain animals that have like fused um, flippers
uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
different like appendages that like toes that might have fused into like three toes when they used to be four toes. Just interesting stuff like that. And I think in its own way, you come up with something that delves into like world mythology and even comics history. I think that would be a nice companion for Battling Boy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well,
Did you read New Frontier, the big collection that DC put out of Darwin Cook stuff?
here I have read New Frontier, yeah, with Darwin Cook. That's the last bit that I caught. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, I was just mentioning how this idea we're talking about, annotated Battling Boy. Um, the edition of New Frontier I got, there's a really nice, a very satisfying read in the back where Darwin goes into detail about all sorts of references that he's pulling into the story
Hmm.
with, like um, more of like a textural background of like what different elements went into the story itself. And I thought that was really cool. Like, I mean, nobody's going to, be quizzed on the history of DC Comics in, you know, English class in high school, but I thought it was cool to read that because the guy put a lot of thought into the story.
Yeah, yeah. My class is actually one where you might be,
Wow.
as a trivia game, you might have Marvel or DC questions. So
Oh, that's
you
great.
never
That's
know.
very cool. That's great.
Yeah, we try, we try. Um, but I have kept you longer than I promised. I appreciate your
No,
time.
it's
Did we miss
enjoyable.
anything? Yeah, yeah, great to talk with
No, I
you as
think,
well.
yeah, it's good. I mean, I guess you got kind of a scoop. I showed you something that I did for the film.
Yeah, yeah,
And
love
then,
that.
I mean, but, it's funny, like everybody in Manhattan, for the most part, lives in a pretty small place. So my studio here, this is where I work for the most part. And then I have a small kitchen and a, bedroom in the back and stuff. But very few people have come to my place.
Mhm.
So, like you know, if people were curious, it's like, that's my archive of current projects. And, personal drawings as well. So it's like, just it was nice to show that little stack of Battling Boy. Well, it's growing now. It's becoming quite a stack, but that's the thing. It's like everybody's like, okay, well, where's Battling Boy 2? It's like, well, it's right here. It's in this it's in this file. No one's seen it yet. It's
It's on the way.
on the way.
Yeah. Well, when I messaged you to talk, one of the things that you said was you were looking forward to talking about this medium that we both love, and I've enjoyed the conversation.
Sure.
Enjoy what you bring to it, and
Yeah.
glad to share about your work, and glad to talk
Thank you.
anytime. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to hype this. I'm pretty much only on Instagram now. I'm at Comics Destroyer, one word, Comics Destroyer. And it has a pretty sizable following. It's growing, which is nice. And I only post artwork, either my stuff in progress or finished pieces or art that I find inspiring. And I often try to find the name of the artist and the date. And if there's a little bit of information about the piece.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's kind of the niche I've carved online. So I don't post anything about the food I'm eating or, here I am on vacation and, whatever. I don't do stuff like that. So I think people appreciate that when I meet people now and they know about the page, then they get excited. There is a Battling Boy page too. It's battling boy underscore, or sorry, at battling underscore boy.
Ah, uh,
And as we get closer to publication, I'm going to be using that more in it. And there I only post art that is either pertinent to Battling Boy, the book, or inspiration that somehow feeds into like art history or mythological subjects, or
great,
sometimes
great.
science fiction.
Yeah. I'll be sure and
So,
link both of those as well
oh,
when I
that's great.
share
Okay,
this.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, and truly glad to talk with you anytime.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.